The air on the Asleel homeworld had a heavy, almost palpable weight, like the quiet that settles just before a thunderstorm. Commander Nathaniel Cortez stood at the center of the chamber, his boots clicking against the smooth, alien floor, as if each step was measured and deliberate. The silence stretched between the human delegation and the Asleel, the galaxy's most ancient species, who had watched over the stars for millennia. The Asleel had seen countless races rise and fall, their lives reduced to whispers in the vast expanse of time. And yet, here they were, standing in judgment of humanity. Zyros, the leader of the Asleel, towered over Nathaniel, his form bathed in the soft golden glow of the room. The alien's skin shimmered with an iridescence, the marks of centuries upon him, and his eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity. He looked down at Nathaniel with the slightest hint of amusement, as though the mere thought of a human challenging their place in the stars was laughable. "You have heard of our great longevity, Commander Cortez," Zyros said, his voice rich with the weight of centuries. His words dripped with condescension. "Our species has existed for over 5,000 years. We have seen the rise and fall of empires. We have watched countless civilizations bloom and fade like flowers in the wind. And yet, here you stand, defiant. A human. A species that barely survives a century. How do you intend to measure up to us?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened, his eyes never leaving the aliens. The Asleel saw time as a weapon, a way to measure superiority. To them, living for so long meant they had the right to dictate the fate of younger species. But Nathaniel had never been one to bow to that kind of arrogance. "We may not live as long as you, Zyros," Nathaniel replied, his voice steady, "but it's not the length of life that matters. It's the quality of it. The things we can accomplish in the time we have. That's why we're here." The Asleel leader raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "And what do you propose, human?" "We'll show you," Nathaniel said, stepping forward. "We'll show you that it's not the number of years that make a species great, but the strength to fight for what matters. And if you believe the human race is so insignificant, then I'll prove it by surviving your so-called test." Zyros studied him carefully for a moment. His species had never been challenged like this before, and it both fascinated and irritated him. "Very well," he said, gesturing to the massive screen behind him. "You will face the trial of the Asleel. A test of endurance and survival. If you succeed, we will recognize your species as worthy of remaining in the Galactic Alliance. Fail, and you will be wiped from existence, as all weak species should." A shiver ran through Nathaniel's spine, but he masked it well. He had heard rumors about the trial. No one had ever survived it. No one had even come close. But this was humanity's chance. He had to seize it, not just for himself, but for every human who had ever been underestimated by the stars. The room hummed with a strange energy as the Asleel prepared the simulation. Nathaniel's team, 7 humans, each of them veterans of the most brutal war zones across the galaxy, stood at the ready. They were all hardened soldiers, and each of them had lost something precious along the way. Family, friends, comrades. In a way, that made them perfect for this test. They knew what it was to lose everything. But more importantly, they knew what it was to fight back, to survive. "Do not disappoint us," Zyros warned, his gaze cold and calculating. "The trial will not be easy." With that, the lights flickered. The chamber shifted, and the floor beneath their feet seemed to vanish. For a moment, Nathaniel felt weightless, his body pulled in all directions as if the very fabric of reality were being torn apart. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus. This wasn't about how hard the test would be. This was about proving that humans could endure. When the world stabilized, they found themselves on a barren planet. The sky was a sickly green, and the air felt like it was thick with poison. The horizon was jagged, dotted with strange, towering spires that looked like the teeth of some great beast. "This is the trial?" Nathaniel asked, his voice edged with disbelief. "This isn't a test of survival. This is a death sentence." Zyros's laughter echoed in their ears, amplified by the chamber's strange acoustics. "This is your test, Commander." the environment will change constantly. The air, the gravity, the very ground beneath you will shift with every passing moment. Adapt or die. Nathaniel glanced at his team, the grim determination in their eyes matching his own. They weren't going to die here. Not today. He wasn't going to let the Asleel win. Listen up, he said, taking command without hesitation. We've faced worse odds. This is just another fight. We survive, we adapt, and we show them what it means to be human. As the first shockwave of heat surged through the atmosphere, Nathaniel and his team started moving, each step a silent declaration. They wouldn't just survive, they would make it count. The Asleel were about to learn that in the end, it was humanity's refusal to back down that made them stronger than any species that had ever lived. The wind howled across the barren landscape, carrying with it the stench of sulfur and burnt metal. Nathaniel stood at the forefront of his team, squinting against the harsh green sky, trying to take in the strange alien world that stretched out before him. It was nothing like Earth. The ground was cracked, and jagged stone formations jutted from the earth like the ribs of some ancient beast. The air was thick and oppressive, a toxic cocktail of gases that made every breath feel like inhaling glass shards. Is this what they meant by survival? Sergeant Thompson muttered from behind him, her voice laced with disbelief. The woman was a force in battle, but even she seemed taken aback by the hostile environment. Nathaniel didn't reply immediately. His mind was already working, calculating, assessing. He could feel his pulse quicken. This wasn't just an ordinary test. This was the Asleel's game, and they'd stacked the odds in their favor. They want us to break, he finally said, his voice low but firm. And we won't. Not if I can help it. A shudder of discomfort ran through the group. It was only their second breath on this planet, and the temperature had already plummeted. His breath formed visible clouds in the cold air, the sudden drop in temperature almost unbearable. Eyes on the horizon. Lieutenant Martinez barked, breaking the tension. The officer, still young but battle-hardened, pointed toward a ridge on the far side of the valley. We need to find shelter, fast. Nathaniel surveyed the group. His team was tough, each one was a seasoned veteran, survivors of the worst that the galaxy could throw at them, but even they were already feeling the effects of the Asleel's trial. Sergeant Thompson was rubbing her arms in an effort to stave off the cold, while Corporal Evans scanned the ground beneath their feet, his eyes darting from one crack in the earth to the next. As smart as they were, the one thing none of them could anticipate was the mind of an alien race that had spent millennia refining the art of manipulation. We move out in 5, Nathaniel said, his tone resolute. Stay sharp. Keep your wits. We're playing their game now, but we're going to set the rules. Martinez nodded, stepping forward to lead the charge. The team fell in line behind her, the crunch of their boots in the frozen earth sounding like a constant drumbeat. As they moved toward the ridge, the landscape shifted. The air around them began to warp. The temperature dropped further, and the gravity felt heavier, pulling at their limbs. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently. The team staggered, caught off guard by the tremors that rattled their bodies and sent clouds of dust swirling into the already toxic air. What the hell was that? Corporal Evans grunted, struggling to keep his balance as the ground beneath him trembled. I don't know, Nathaniel replied, his voice tight with control, but I have a feeling it's only the beginning. Before they could move, a loud screech echoed across the sky. It was a sound that sent a cold ripple through the group, a shrill, unnatural call, like the cry of some monstrous bird of prey. Nathaniel spun toward the sound just as something large and dark soared overhead. His eyes widened as he recognized the shape of the creature, massive, with wings like bat's leather, and claws long enough to tear a man apart. It's a trap! Martinez shouted, pulling her rifle from her back. Get ready! The creature, a grotesque amalgamation of alien biology, swooped down, its talons gleaming in the dim light. The team scattered, diving for cover as the creature's screech split the air. But even as they dove for safety, the ground beneath them cracked open. Huge fissures opened wide, revealing jagged spires of stone that seemed to twist upward like the fingers of some vengeful god. More creatures emerged, their hulking bodies silhouetted against the green sky. There were dozens of them now, surrounding the team on all sides, forcing them into a deadly game of cat and mouse. Nathaniel's mind raced. The Asleel hadn't just thrown them into an inhospitable environment, they had unleashed predators. Living nightmares, designed to test the human will to survive. "We fight back," Nathaniel growled, his voice cold with determination. "Do not let them separate us." The team took their positions, their training kicking in as they laid down fire. Each shot from their rifles illuminated the creatures' silhouettes, but the things kept coming, seemingly impervious to their weapons. Nathaniel's heart pounded in his chest as he fired into the swarm, but for every one they killed, 2 more replaced it. "We need a plan," Thompson yelled over the noise of gunfire. Her face was pale, the exhaustion setting in, but her will was unwavering. "Focus on the biggest one," Nathaniel ordered, spotting the largest of the creatures, its wingspan blocking out the sky. "Take it down, and the rest will scatter." He didn't wait for confirmation. He dashed toward a jagged rock formation, using it as cover. His mind was a blur of tactics and calculations as his soldiers followed suit. With a single, coordinated effort, they launched an assault on the massive creature. It screeched in fury as it dove toward them, but before it could strike, the team opened fire, hitting its weak spots, its eyes, its underbelly. The beast let out a final, deafening cry before it crumpled to the ground, twitching in its death throes. But as it fell, a horrifying realization dawned on Nathaniel. This was the first test. And they had barely survived. "We've got to move," he said, his voice taut with urgency. "The Asleel are watching. This is only the beginning." The air thickened around them. The real challenge had just begun. The ground trembled beneath their feet, still warm from the fall of the monstrous creature they had slain. Nathaniel's team, now battered and bruised, regrouped in a tight circle near the jagged spires. Their rifles were hot from the relentless barrage of shots, and the heavy air pressed against their chests like a vice. They had survived the first wave, but the Asleel weren't known for mercy. "Are you all right?" Nathaniel's voice cut through the tension, his eyes scanning the group. Lieutenant Martinez gave a quick nod, her jaw set firm. Her dark hair, usually neatly tied back, was disheveled and matted with sweat. But the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. "I'm good," she said, voice steady. "We've been through worse." Sergeant Thompson, ever the skeptic, wasn't as convinced. She crouched behind a rock formation, wiping blood from a cut on her cheek. "This place is just getting started. I've got a feeling it's about to get a whole lot worse." Nathaniel grimaced, feeling the truth in her words. He could sense it in the air, something had shifted. The ground beneath them had stopped shaking, but the pulse of danger was still there. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next challenge. "We need to find cover," he said, his tone firm but calm. "Head for the ridge. Stick together." Without another word, the team moved, keeping their formation tight. Every step they took felt heavier, as if the very gravity of this planet was growing stronger, testing their endurance. As they climbed the jagged terrain, the wind picked up again, biting through their fatigues and stinging their skin. Nathaniel's teeth clenched as he fought the cold gnawing at his bones. He had seen war zones, but this place, this alien world, was unlike anything he had ever imagined. "Check your 6, Corporal Evans called out, his eyes darting nervously over his shoulder. "Something's moving out there." The team froze, rifles raised, scanning the horizon. The sky above them was an unnatural shade of green, thick clouds swirling in a permanent storm, casting eerie shadows over the landscape. The ground was pockmarked with massive craters, each one a reminder that this world was anything but hospitable. "Nothing," Nathaniel muttered, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He could feel it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. "Stay sharp." Without warning, the ground beneath them cracked open once more, and a roar echoed through the air, a guttural, earth-shaking cry. It wasn't the creatures they had fought before. This sound was deeper, more menacing. "We're not alone anymore," Thompson whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. From the fissures in the earth, a new threat emerged, a massive, hulking beast that seemed to rise out of the ground like some ancient titan. Its body was covered in thick, armored plating, and its eyes glowed a sickly yellow as it locked onto Nathaniel's team. It was almost as if the planet itself had sent a guardian to finish them off. "Get down!" Nathaniel shouted, diving for cover as the beast unleashed a deafening roar, its claws scraping against the rocks. The team scattered, opening fire on the creature. But the beast's armor was nearly impenetrable. Every shot bounced off its thick hide, and it seemed to grow angrier with each failed strike. "It's too strong," Martinez yelled, her voice tinged with frustration. "We need to hit its weak spots," Nathaniel said, thinking quickly. "Aim for the joints. The underbelly." They adjusted their fire, trying to target the creature's legs and underbelly, but the beast was relentless, charging at them with the speed of a predator. Thompson was the first to break cover, charging forward with her weapon raised. "Thompson, no!" Nathaniel shouted, but it was too late. She ducked beneath the creature's massive claws, rolling underneath its belly, and fired point-blank into its soft underbelly. The creature let out a terrifying howl as it reared back, but the wound was too deep. With a final, blood-curdling roar, it collapsed, shaking the ground beneath them. The team stood in stunned silence, watching the massive beast twitch in its final moments. Thompson, panting and covered in dirt, stood over it, eyes wide but determined. "That's how we do it," she said, a grin breaking through her exhaustion. Nathaniel exhaled, his body still tense, but a small spark of pride ignited within him. They had won, again. But he knew this wasn't over. "Nice work, Sergeant," he said, his voice steady. "But don't get too cocky. The Asleel are still watching." The team huddled together, catching their breath. They were a long way from home, and every step they took felt like a battle against time. But Nathaniel saw something in his team now that hadn't been there before, an unspoken understanding. They were more than just soldiers. They were survivors. "We've made it this far," Martinez said, wiping sweat from her forehead, her gaze hard. "We'll make it the rest of the way." Nathaniel nodded, glancing at the sky above them. He could feel the weight of the Asleel's eyes on them. This was their game, but they weren't playing by their rules anymore. Humanity was going to prove that even against the might of an ancient race, they had the one thing that no alien species could ever take away: resilience. "We move out," Nathaniel ordered, his voice clear. "Keep moving. We haven't won yet." The wind howled again, but this time, it sounded less like a warning and more like a challenge. The storm had reached its apex. Dark clouds churned violently above as the wind howled with a ferocity that rattled the bones. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and blood, the latter mostly theirs. Nathaniel's team stood in the shadow of a craggy outcrop, exhaustion etched into their faces, but determination burning in their eyes. They had survived the beasts, the toxic atmosphere, and the gravity-defying horrors the Asleel had thrown at them. But something gnawed at Nathaniel, an unease deeper than physical fatigue. "The Asleel are watching," Nathaniel muttered, his voice grim. His gaze swept over the jagged landscape, always searching, always vigilant. "You're damn right they are," Thompson replied, wiping blood from her brow. "They've been testing us like lab rats since the moment we landed." Martinez, standing tall at Nathaniel's side, her rifle clutched tightly in her hands, nodded. "Whatever they're planning, we're almost at the end of their game. Just a little longer." Behind them, the rest of the team adjusted their gear, each of them battle-hardened yet visibly strained. The Asleel had subjected them to more than just physical trials. They'd been tested mentally, forced into impossible situations that pushed them to the edge. But Nathaniel wasn't about to let them break. They were humans, after all. And humanity had a reputation of defying expectations. A sudden tremor cut through the ground, more violent than any before. A deep rumble reverberated in their chests, followed by an eerie silence that seemed to stretch too long. "What's happening?" Evans asked, his voice tight. "This isn't a quake," Nathaniel said, instinctively scanning the horizon. "This feels deliberate. The earth cracked open beneath them, and from the fissure, a monstrous figure emerged, bigger than anything they had encountered. This time, it wasn't just a creature, it was an embodiment of the planet's fury. Its scales were like obsidian, reflecting the unnatural green sky. A spiked tail lashed behind it, and its glowing eyes pierced through the haze. "Brace yourselves," Nathaniel barked. The team moved quickly, weapons raised, but this new threat was different. It didn't charge. It didn't roar. It stood there, towering, waiting for them to make the first move. Nathaniel felt the weight of the Asleel's gaze even more now. This wasn't a test of survival anymore. This was the final trial. "Do you think they'll step in if we fail?" Martinez asked, her tone cool despite the situation. Nathaniel shot her a look. "If we fail, there won't be an if." He leveled his rifle, but he knew, instinctively, that their usual tactics wouldn't work on this beast. This wasn't just about brute force, this was a battle of wills. "Plan?" Thompson asked, already anticipating the worst. "We're going to have to outlast it." "Draw it into the open, use the terrain," Nathaniel replied, tightening his grip on his rifle. "And we'll need to break its focus. If it's waiting for us to make the first move, let's make it. But stick together." The beast let out a low, guttural growl, its massive jaws parting to reveal rows of serrated teeth. Its tail lashed again, sending a tremor through the earth. It didn't seem to have any particular fear of their weapons. And that's when Nathaniel realized, the Asleel had designed this trial with one goal in mind, to test how far they could push humanity's resilience. He turned to his team, meeting each of their eyes. "We show them what humans are capable of. We don't bend, we don't break. We fight." Without waiting for a response, he sprinted toward the creature, the rest of the team following suit. The beast roared as it lunged forward, faster than Nathaniel had anticipated. It was too big, too strong. Their rifles barely scratched its hide. "Get to cover," he shouted, diving behind a rock outcrop. The team scattered, seeking shelter behind boulders and jagged stones. Thompson laid down covering fire, her shots ricocheting off the beast's thick scales, distracting it for just a moment. That was all they needed. Evans and Martinez flanked the creature, moving with precision, forcing the beast's attention to shift between the two sides. But Nathaniel knew their window was closing. He reached into his pack, pulling out a set of explosive charges, one last gambit. With the beast distracted, he dashed forward, his heart hammering in his chest. The ground shook with each of the creature's steps, but Nathaniel was focused. He placed the charges along the creature's side, just beneath its armor. "Now!" Nathaniel shouted. The team opened fire once more, aiming at the beast's underbelly where the charges were set. The explosion rocked the air, sending a shockwave that knocked the team back, but the creature let out a screeching howl and staggered, its massive body crumpling under the impact. It collapsed with a deafening crash, the earth quaking beneath its weight. Silence descended. Nathaniel's breathing was ragged, his entire body trembling from the adrenaline. But as the dust settled, he looked around at his team. They had done it. The final trial was over. And they had passed. Martinez was the first to speak, her voice hushed with awe. "We did it." Thompson laughed, breathless. "I'll never get used to that kind of victory." Nathaniel surveyed the group, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride surge within him. "We didn't just survive. We proved something." He turned his gaze to the sky, knowing the Asleel were watching, waiting. The planet around them seemed to hold its breath. "They'll remember this," he said quietly. "They'll remember us." And as they walked away from the broken body of the beast, Nathaniel knew one thing for certain: humanity had shown the Asleel that no trial was too great, no challenge too insurmountable. They had won.